Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's video on the Leadership Collaborative YouTube channel. I'm Kayla. I am the creator of the Leader Standard Workbook through the Leave Happy method. If you haven't checked me out on my Instagram, please follow me at Leave Happy method or check out my personal page at Kayla Fahey-Ahrndt. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how I use my Leader Standard Workbook to actually do process improvement planning and do process workflow diagrams or flow diagrams. And so I'm going to show you how I use the grid paper to do that. So if you haven't checked out my Leader Standard Workbook, it is a planner for leaders. I haven't really seen anything like this. It has leader standard work templates, project management templates and tools, goal setting tools, one-on-one meeting templates. So this is like the perfect creative outlet for leaders to plan, people who still like pen to paper type of feel, but also want to be very organized. So it's like making it fun, but also like a logical brained person can use this as well as a creative. Maybe you're both, which is just like me. So let's get to it. I'm gonna go right to, I'm actually go to my favorites. So I'm going to show you how I create process maps and workflow diagrams. So I'm going to actually recreate this one for you. I'm going to show you what the different circles and symbols mean in creating a workflow diagram. But first I want to say, whenever you are going to do a process improvement initiative, the first thing you want to understand is your current state. So what's actually happening right now? A lot of times we know like something needs to change, we need to improve it, this thing isn't working, but a lot of times we don't have that documented anywhere. When we know our current state, we can make changes and then we have something to measure. Once you go to your future ideal state or whatever you want to improve, you want to be able to look back and think, did I accomplish what I wanted to? Is it working? Are the changes I put in place actually getting me to my ideal state and closing the gap between my ideal state and my current state? The next thing you want to know is your future state. So what's your ideal state? Like, where do you want to be? So a good example that I'm going to show you today is maybe getting blood. I work for blood bank. I'm a transfusion services manager, so I hope it doesn't creep anyone out. I'm talking about blood, but you get a transfusion. Maybe you have donated blood in the past. We want to make sure we get out blood really fast to our customers, which are our OR, our operating room, or our patients in the clinic, right? And so our future ideal state in this example would be reducing the turnaround time or the time that it takes to get blood to those patients, right? And so maybe right now my problem is that we're getting some customer complaints it's taking too long. So what I want to do is know my current state, what I'd like to happen, and then you want to identify your delta or your gap. So the actions that your delta or your gap is the gap between your current and your future or your ideal state. Once you know like what your gap is, then you can identify actions to take to close that gap. So this can be done by using a process map or a workflow diagram. So I'm going to show you how to make one of these. So the first thing is, if you go Google process map or workflow diagram, you're going to find different symbols, and you're probably going to find like 100 different symbols that you can use. I like to keep it simple, so I like to use 4 different symbols. I like to use the oval for the start and the end of a process. I like to use the rectangle or the square for a step in the process. I like to use a diamond for decision points in the process, and I use arrows to connect points in the process. So the point of doing a process map or a workflow diagram when you're thinking about process improvement or closing the gap between current and ideal state, the whole idea is to eliminate waste, to create a really high quality product or service. You want it to be the most cost-effective service or product that you can provide. You want it to be cheap if you can, with quality. And you also want it to be really simple or easy for your people to perform it. You don't want them having to perform. I saw somebody, I'm going to write this down because I heard somebody say mental gymnastics. They said this the other day. If your staff have to go through mental gymnastics in order to perform a process, it's probably not simple enough. Like if they have to think really, really hard and it's taking time and it's creating waste or a barrier for them to do their work, you probably need to do some process improvement. So the whole goal is you want to remove steps that are duplicative. You don't want rework happening. You don't want multiple people doing the same work. You want to get rid of the non-value added steps, things that you can think of where you're like, that actually doesn't need to happen. You only want to include the steps that add value to creating a quality, cost-effective, and simple process or service or product. All right, so now let me show you how I actually build this. So what you would do is you would start out mapping your current state. I'm going to make it blue because why not? So like I said, you would start with an oval as your start and your stop. So in this example that I came up with before, my first step is my blood orders print in the blood bank off our Epic network printer. Now, I also want to caution you, when you're thinking about your current state, you want to think about scope. When you're process mapping, it's really easy to be like, okay, we need to identify all 100 steps in a process from start to finish. But that's a lot. Maybe you want to think more simple and focus on the role of one person or one function within a process and then connect them later. So for this example, I'm just going to think about the person receiving our orders for blood and what they do with them to get it to the person who's going to actually fill the orders for the blood. Okay, so my first step is that the Epic blood order prints on our network printer. So I'm a medical laboratory scientist by training. I'm a lab manager for system blood bank operations. And so when I'm talking about blood orders, I'm talking about blood needed for transfusion. So shout out to anybody who's ever given a blood donation, because this is what we're using to help patients in the operating room, in the emergency room, cancer patients who get transfused, who need help supporting them through their chemotherapy. This is so, so important. And as you can imagine, we want to get that to them as quick as possible, right? We don't want to have delays in our service. So that is how you create the oval and the start of your process. You'll notice I'm using the GoodNotes app for this. You can make a weird shape, but then if you hold, it'll make it like more perfect. You can also just click the shapes tool here and it'll make a nice perfect shape for you automatically when you let go. So either way works. All right, so the blood order prints in our network printer. So then I'm gonna put an arrow to connect it to the next process. All right, let me remind myself. The next step would be the clerk looks up history in SafeTrace. So that's our computer system. So I'm thinking about the clerk's role. Clerk, so they actually take order, if I'm getting really detailed, from printer and scans patient info into SafeTrace. So you can get super detailed, especially if this is for a working diagram or flow document for your frontline staff to use. You don't want to skip steps or make assumptions. So for example, I want them to scan the patient info. I don't want them to type it in. I might want to say scan medical record number. You decide how detailed you get. Clerk looks in SafeTrace for current type in screen. So this is your ABO, your RH, and your antibody screen. That's what we have to do to be able to give you blood. So I did the start of a process, and then these two boxes are a step in the process. So I guess this would be like step 1, this would be step 2 after the start. Now here is where we run into a decision-making point. So the next step would be a decision. So the clerk's going to look and safe trace for a current type-in screen. The next thing we need to know is, does the patient have a current type-in screen? And for decision points, remember, we talked about they are diamonds. So we're going to use diamonds to delineate, to specify this. And if I didn't want to go on to the next paper, whew, that was bad. You can actually use your graph paper to make this look pretty. That's why I like using the graph. There you go. Okay, if you're like a perfectionist like I can be sometimes, that's why I like digital planning, because you can just move stuff around. You can also do this on Post-its. As you can imagine, Post-its are square, right? So you can flip them sideways to make them into diamonds. So that works really well. I'm just gonna keep going across the page, which is why I love this graph paper. If I needed to, I could just go down instead of across. So this would be decision point number 1. And I'm just actually gonna move this to the top here, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have decision 1 and this first choice, and then one that goes down like this. So does this patient have a current type-in screen? Yes or no? So this is where you can start to branch in your workflow, right? You can have your start, step 1, 2, and yes or no. So this is where your workflow might branch. So if the patient has a current type-in screen, yes, I think my next step would be clerk writes current type-in screen specimen ID on Epic order. And that is another step in the process. So that would be step number 3. But in this case, if a patient doesn't have a current type-in screen, maybe the next step is clerk opens Epic, which is our medical record computer program, and looks to see if heme tube, so this would be a specimen that we could add on the type-in screen to, is available to add on type-in screen. You don't have to understand what I'm talking about, but you can just see that these are all the decisions that you would have to make, and the steps in the process. You want to think about the entirety of the process. So if you go back to the yes one, maybe it's clerk writes current type-in screen, specimen ID on Epic order. And then maybe the last step for them is clerk files order for cross-match tech to perform testing. And I'll say in X bin. I don't know. Maybe there's different bins and you want them to put it in a specific one. And that's their last step. Maybe that's as committed as they are. Once they're done handing off that order, that's the last step for the clerk in this workflow. Okay, so this would be stop. So it starts here and it stops here. Weirdo that I am. Make it like more like that. And then you would do the same thing for this workflow. So now you have a complete process map. What you could then do is go back to your staff or your frontline. You can have your frontline do this, or you could do this with your leaders. And then they could look at this and be like, oh, you're missing a step. And you could come in and edit it. You can be like, oh, add, X, Y, Z. Or this is why I love digital planning. You can just highlight this step and you could be like, okay, I think this step is going to be actually it's over here, right? So you can just move things around, you can cross off steps, you can say, you know what, this step is not value added, it's rework, let's get rid of that. And maybe it goes, these two steps connect. So that's where you can start to edit your different workflow process. Now, this is the current state. So then what you would want to do is think about like, okay, what's your problem? So in my case, I need to reduce the time it takes for this process so that we can get blood out faster, let's say. And so then my future ideal state is maybe I want to shave like 10 minutes off the process. So then as I'm thinking about, well, okay, here's my current state. How do I shave 10 minutes off the process? You're starting to think of the different ways that you could shave 10 minutes off. So what are the wasteful steps? What are only the value added steps? What are the rework steps? How do I make it more simple? How do I increase quality? How do I reduce the thinking needed or the mental gymnastics needed during this workflow? And then what you would do is after you've made some edits here, you might so you'd have a list of things like actions to take to get from current to ideal state. And think about these as like little experiments. You can also think about them as small tests of change. That's the delta symbol for change. Small tests of change. So you might try like number one, your idea number one, your number two idea, and your number three idea, for example. And if you're thinking about this in a scientific way, you might think about the fact that maybe you just want to change one thing at a time, because the more variables you introduce, the harder it is to tell like which thing actually contributed to shaving 10 minutes off of this, process. And you want to know what things that people are finding value added and what things might feel wasteful. So as you start to take actions, you can then process map your future state here. So you'd have this new workflow. And you can even create your future ideal state right away or based on some of these ideas you have. You might say, like I said, you might eliminate some steps. So you might say, okay, I'm going to experiment with moving this step to the front and see what that does. So now our future state looks like this. Let's pilot that idea and see if it helps. And if it does, keep it. If it doesn't, scrap it. Then once you're done and you feel like you've accomplished your goal or you have a better understanding of your future state, you can actually take this workflow diagram and publish it in a document controlled way so that all your staff have access to it. And this is now your standard work. And standard work, I always talk about it for leaders. The thing that you do recurring or always that helps you be successful every day. And it's the same thing for your front line or anyone that's doing processes or work for you or with you, because there are so many people that work maybe in your department. You all want to be doing it in the same way so that if there is an issue, where to start in current state to decide how do you get to future state. If everybody's deviating or doing things differently, you actually can't solve your problem and you don't know what's going on. So I find a lot of times when we're having issues in the lab or when we're struggling to meet our goals, it's because we don't have clear expectations for our front line. So you can even think of standard work as clear expectations for how to do the right work when. Because this is going to tell you when to do each step in the right order and that it's the right work to be doing. So I hope this helped you. I love being able to use my Leader Standard workbook to use these graph paper templates to make workflow diagrams. One thing that I was able to do it when I was creating other flow diagrams for my staff, maybe I can find one for you, is that I was able to just like send it to them. So here's an example of another process diagram that I created for my staff. It was very scribbly, but it was a draft and I needed to get it out of my head and into their hands. So what I ended up doing is you can hit this little export, share and export, and you can just do this page of your notebook. I made it into a PDF. And then I can just, you can choose how you send it. So actually just would email it to myself and it shows up like this as a picture, and I can just send that out to my team. So instead of like having to make it perfect and fancy like we all like to do as like Enneagram 3s or 9s or whatever you are, just like a perfectionist in a little bit of a way, send it out and get it out quicker to them, and they can give you real-time feedback. All right, I hope this video was helpful to you. If you have more questions or want to learn more about the Leader Standard Workbook, I would love to answer it. If you would like to grab the Leader Standard Workbook, it is in the description below, and you get this with all the different templates. There's also a video you can watch that shows you a tutorial of this entire notebook. Also on my website, I have just small templates that you can buy and even like little sticker pages, so you can decorate your Leader Standard Workbook and make it fun and creative. And I know a lot of you are creatives as well as logical brain folks, and so this is kind of like the best of both worlds. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and be here for another video each week. All right, take care everybody. Thanks for watching.